If you ask any self-respecting gamer about licensed games, chances are the response you receive will be barely indecipherable from a series of random curse words. Licensed properties represent a category of games that is nearly universally bad. For every Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay, there are between 5 and 50 Superman 64s, depending on who you ask. So it is with a glad heart that today I can tell you that South Park Stick of Truth is closer to Chronicles of Riddick than Superman 64. Beginning from the moment the opening cutscene introduces you to the game within a game that is the quest for the Stick of Truth to the end of the final scene, South Park Stick of Truth feels like you are playing an episode of the show. Matt Smith and Trey Parker have done their level best to ensure that the humor evident in the show is brought forward in familiar ways so fans of South Park and gamers, of which I am sure there is substantial overlap, can immerse themselves in being the new kid. The game adopts the unique Maya-powered animation style of the show and executes it more or less flawlessly. Beyond the animation style, the game is littered with Easter eggs and references to the show, both visual and verbal. While this could have easily gone wrong, feeling a little bit too remember when, it comes off as giving a sense that you, the player, are actually inhabiting this world that Stone and Parker have created over 17 seasons. One point I feel compelled to bring up, if only because I feel it's misleading, is the frame rate. The game's options menu insists that it's running at 1920 by 1080 and 60 FPS. However, the somewhat jumpy background betrays the fact, confirmed with a frame rate counter, that the game is actually locked to 30 FPS. Generally, I'm not one to harp on frame rates. How much they matter depends heavily on the game, with South Park Stick of Truth being an example of where it has almost no relevance. Also, the truth is, the small jumpiness in the background is not entirely distracting, and I wouldn't have even mentioned it had Obsidian omitted a spec frame rate in the options screen. However, they did, and I feel it's misleading, so it warrants at least a mention. The sound effects found in the game are clearly designed by Foley artists who are passionate about farts and the squishy sounds of excrement, and their love for these notes, implications fully intended, oozes through your speakers or headphones at every possible opportunity. Beyond the cruder sound effects, however, the sound of weapons are generic bass thumps or tinny slices. While this isn't really a deal breaker, more weapon sound variety would have been nice. Another aspect that could have gone with more variety is the music. The tracks that are in there are very good, don't get me wrong. However, it would have been nice to hear a few more tracks with Cartman singing in dramatic faux Latin, a decidedly Cartman move to add drama and epicness to the proceedings of the game. The bottom line is, while I feel I have pointed out a few areas that could use improvement, it's important to understand that if their objective was to make you, the player, feel like a participant in a South Park episode or movie, they have succeeded in spades. The story is unsurprisingly great. Stone and Parker are unapologetic and vocal perfectionists. This shows in the story and the writing of their characters. Naturally, being a South Park game, they turn their topical wit to geek and gamer culture, asking us to all have a laugh at our own expense. Additionally, they can't help but take aim at the games they are trying to imitate themselves. One particular instance of this occurs during the combat tutorial, with Cartman admonishing Clyde to wait his turn by saying, "You have to wait your turn like in the medieval times. I know it's lame, but that's how we're fucking doing it." While the joke itself is pretty obvious, because seriously, what is with characters in JRPGs patiently waiting their turn, the delivery makes it work. It's a joke that would be just as at home in a South Park episode or movie as it is in this game. The story itself starts with a nickel and dime story focusing exclusively on the LARP game the boys are playing. Split into two groups vying for control of the Stick of Truth feels exactly like the kind of game I would have played in 4th grade, though we would not have been nearly as intense as the South Park crew. Of course, much like Stone and Parker are fond of doing, a child's game quickly changes into something else with little relation to the initial subject of the episode. This is not to say that they don't circle back to it. They do, and the story is ended with a sense of finality covering all of their bases. I have already discussed some of it, but the dialogue is exactly what you would expect from a game that purports to be a South Park game. Beyond that, I don't really want to comment too much so as to avoid giving away too many jokes, but trust me, it is on point. Mechanically, the game looks to the east for inspiration. It takes the turn-based combat of JRPGs, strips it down, simplifies it, and adds some token interactivity to the attack sequences. I would hesitate to call this a hardcore JRPG because the character building, while extant, is less than hardcore. You do have the ability to customize your character's abilities and how they improve in addition to a perk system based on making friends with the characters of South Park, so the RPG elements are not stripped away entirely. Beyond the building of your character's abilities and perks, there is some limited character customization. The game is class-based with 3 traditional classes: Warrior, Thief, and Mage. The 4th class is Jew. I played a Jew in my game, and the class heavily relies on applying status effects to monsters and buffs to your party. It's similar to a defender or controller class that a lot of games have these days. In terms of looks, there is a reasonable variety of combinations allowing you to customize an avatar that fits your personality, or even your looks. That said, no girls allowed. The South Park boys don't play with girls because they have cooties. Of course, you can change your character's armor and weapons as you see fit with plenty of options. This is coupled with an armor modification system that slants away from rows on rows of statistics, opting instead for a few simple attributes that aren't directly interchangeable. The end result is that it's very easy to find an armor style that you like, and very valid to use it in lieu of other armors. I have specifically mentioned these things together because Stick of Truth does an awesome job of incorporating your specific character, including their armor and flair, into cutscenes, making them unique to your specific playthrough. This is a nice touch that adds to the immersion of the game. There are a slew of side quests given to you by the various members of the South Park cast, both old and new. These are not terribly difficult to complete, but they are more than fetch quests, and they really encourage you to explore the entirety of the world. While it isn't the biggest world around, it's definitely dense, and that plays to its favor. That said, if running around this little world bothers you, Timmy offers a free fast travel service using his wheelchair, so getting around is never an arduous task. Control-wise, the PC controls are adequate, but the existence of button-mashing QuickTime events caused me to move to playing with a controller. The button-mashing events can be challenging. In fact, I am somewhat convinced that taking a poop in this game is impossible, but the ones that matter are passable. The existence of QTEs is contentious to some, but Stick of Truth uses them sparingly and always tries to combine them with humor, so I found them largely inoffensive. The UI is adequate, conveys the information required, and doesn't get in your way. So, all in all, it does exactly what it needs to do, so it gets at least a thumbs up for that. In terms of replay value, I don't think I found everything there was to find, and it may merit a revisit just for that. There is a choice in the game that locks you out of another path, but realistically speaking, they both lead to the same place. So plot-wise, there is not a ton of replay value, but if you're a completionist or explorer, then you will find a good amount of nooks and crannies to put your nose into. Now, I've avoided talking about the elephant in the room, but it's time. This game was developed by Obsidian. Obsidian is known for producing games that just have tons of bugs. These bugs can range from the small and insignificant to the game-breaking and terrible. In my playthrough of Stick of Truth, I ran into a few bugs, though none that forced me to actually lose progress. That said, it was an absolute bummer to see one of those bugs pop up and stop my progress dead in its tracks just 20 minutes in. Come on, Obsidian, how many times was this game delayed? Why is there a progression stopping bug less than an hour in what is usually the most playtested part of any given game? Sure, I eventually got past it by reloading enough times, but in the words of Sweet Brown, ain't nobody got time for that. The only other bug of note I experienced required me to set Steam to offline mode to finish the game, which is why I don't have the achievements for completing it. I'm mentioning these because they are salient at the time of this video, but, realistically speaking, even with Obsidian's track record, they will be fixed shortly, I'm sure. So, who is this game for? Well, the obvious answer is fans of South Park. That said, I would call myself a casual fan of South Park, and I got a large portion of the references the game threw at me. I'm sure there were jokes and references I missed, but I caught enough of them to enjoy the humor of the game. In a more general sense, if you are a fan of the absurd, satire, and you enjoy a good fart or poop joke, then you will find yourself fitting warmly into this game's target audience. Clearly, if you don't like those things, you should probably avoid this game like the plague. The gameplay is a love letter to JRPGs, so if you like turn-based combat, it'll likely be up your alley. That said, if you are one to appreciate the finer nuances and stat hounding that more hardcore JRPGs give you, chances are you will be a little disappointed. In terms of what other games to look at, mechanics-wise, Stick of Truth plays a lot like older Final Fantasy titles. The addition of simple QTEs to increase the effectiveness of your attacks is a nice additional small complexity that adds a bit more to the feel than open menu, press A, watch pretty cutscene, which may be attractive to players who are less than enthused about turn-based combat. But it should be noted that if you absolutely hate it, it's basically set dressing. The underlying system is still turn-based. So all in all, the selling point of this game is the humor and the writing more than the gameplay itself, though the gameplay is perfectly fine. So, to that end, this. If you like crude humor and think a good fart joke never truly loses its charm, buy. If the thought of that makes you clutch your pearls and bemoan the crass state of affairs, skip. Everyone in the middle? Well, then you need to make a decision based on the satire. Consider how much you like South Park as a show, then go from there. If you're a diehard fan of South Park, why are you listening to this review? You already own the game. Well, that's my review of South Park Stick of Truth. I hope it gave you what you needed to make a decision, so as always, like it if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, comments are down below if you disagree, and you can catch us on Facebook and Twitter at RumblePackLP. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye, Internet.